Now I have the great fortune of introducing my colleague, Dr. Helen Roberts, and our postdoctoral research fellow, Stephanie Rinzhu-Zhang, to present some of our Climate Energy Finance Group research. So this is one of our many projects that we thought might fit nicely into today. And it's actually a collaboration with Mindful Money, taking a deeper dive into a survey they ran, I believe earlier this year or late last year. So over to you, Helen. Thank you.
All right, tēnā koutou katoa. So my name is Helen Roberts and I have the pleasure of presenting with Dr. Stephanie Zhang this afternoon. This is a collaborative piece of research together with Associate Professor Ivan Diaz-Rainey and Barry Coates, who is the founder and CEO of Mindful Money. And Mindful Money ran a survey in 2020 looking at 3 different research questions that we're going to walk you through the results of this afternoon. All right, so we've nearly found the presentation. Come through. All right, thanks, Stephanie. All right, so maybe we'll just go to the next. You might need to get Sebastian to walk through the slides. So there are our 4 lovely faces. So we'll just go straight into the research questions, and Stephanie and I are going to double team it. You can just go straight down. Thanks, Sebastian. So you can see the 3 research questions. They're really interested in what makes investors want to choose an ethical option over a conventional option, and then what are some of the perceptions of the ethical returns on investment, and finally, are actual adopters of ethical investments willing to sacrifice returns as opposed to more traditional forms of investment. All right, yeah, keep going, thanks. All right, head over to Stephanie.
Okay, so I'll talk about the data. So we started with a sample of 1,031 survey respondents, and Mindful Money collected the demographic information for all of them. However, only those who have a KiwiSaver account or other financial investments can participate in the survey section. So that's why we ended up with 831 usable responses. And then among those 831, we have 217, which is 26%, that are actual adopters, which means they have purchased ethical investments. There are 522, which is 63%. They are potential adopters, which means they haven't purchased any SRI funds, but they are planning to do it in the near future. And then we have 92 survey respondents saying that they're not interested in investing in SRI. So we compared our sample with the New Zealand overall population to make sure that our sample is representative of the New Zealand population as a whole. So as you can see here, our age variable and our region variable, as well as the gender and the type of places that people choose to live in on the next PPT slide. So they're all representative of the overall New Zealand population. The only difference is that our sample tend to be slightly better educated than the overall New Zealand population. And we do have more people that is concentrated within the mid-income range group.
All right, so going to our first research question, what are the factors that influence the types of investors we see making ethical investments? Keep going. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, here I am. All right, so the first factor we look at is perceived return, and we see those investors who make ethical choices who think that the returns are going to be better or much better than traditional investments. 18 and 33% more likely to become actual adopters of ethical choice. And then the next factor is looking at their knowledge. So we see again that investors who have heard and can explain what an ethical investment choice is have a much higher likelihood of adopting, and that is 18% higher than a traditional investor. And then we look at trust, so trust around the claims that are made because of ethical choices, around responsibility, sustainability. We see that those investors who place high trust in the claims that these investments make are 13.5% more likely to become an actual adopter. And then looking at the age range relative to that younger age group, the 18 to 24-year-olds, we see that individuals 65 years and older are 12.5% more likely to become actual adopters. Then on the next slide, there's another 4 factors that also influence choices around social responsible investing. So we see those investors who are using qualified information sources that are either non-independent, so they're getting information from the financial services sector, or they're using qualified information from both independent and non-independent sources. Both of those generate high likelihoods of becoming actual adopters as well, 12.6 and 8.4%. And then relative to an investment strategy where you engage with non-ethical investment, we see that investors who prefer to screen out non-ethical choices are 10.3% more likely to choose ethical investment strategies. And then those last 2 domains, looking at the impact on the social and environmental dimensions, so relative to investors who think that their choices have no influence on climate change, we see that perceived consumer effectiveness on environmental and overall high consideration around environmental causes both have higher likelihood of becoming actual adopters.
Okay, and then we explore whether the investor type actually can determine people's perception of SRI return and their willingness to sacrifice returns for SRI. So as you can see from the first PPT slide, we can see that the actual adopters, they're 24% more likely to perceive much better returns from SRI compared to a conventional investor. Also, the potential adopters, they're about 9% more likely to perceive much better returns from ethical investment compared to conventional investors. Next up is the area type. So we see that compared to people who live in rural areas, people who live in urban areas, they're more likely to perceive much better returns from SRI. And that's probably because of the information that they received. So there are a lot of news articles talking about how ethical investment can outperform the conventional investments during economic downturns, especially during the COVID-19 crisis. So that's probably one reason that the people who live in urban areas, they're more likely to perceive much better returns from SRI. Also, they may have more investment choices around the ethical investment products. And then we can see that people who have high social and environmental a high perceived consumer effectiveness on social and environmental outcomes, they're also much more likely to perceive better returns from SRI. So for those who can exclude some sort of companies from their investment portfolios, they're more likely to perceive better returns from SRI by excluding companies that behave badly in terms of their social and environmental performance. Interestingly, we can see that although people who age 65 plus, they're more likely to have purchased SRI, they actually tend to be less likely to perceive better returns from SRI. And so our explanation is that those people who choose SRI, probably not because of the high return, but because of their risk aversion and the perceived low risks associated with ethical investments. Okay, and then we also run the audit probit regression on the factors affecting people's willingness to sacrifice returns for SRI. So consistent with our hypothesis, both the potential adopters and actual adopters, they're much more likely to be willing to sacrifice returns compared to the conventional investors. And then people who have high perceived consumer effectiveness on social outcomes, they're more likely to be willing to sacrifice returns to invest in things like social housing, education, etc. And then for those who have heard of SRI and cannot explain it, a basic knowledge of SRI is enough to motivate them to be willing to sacrifice returns in order for the goodness attached to the ethical investments. Also, people who prefers some sort of exclusion in their investment portfolios, they're willing to compromise returns for those negative screens. And then we find that people who have higher environmental considerations, they're more likely to be willing to sacrifice returns, but the result is quite marginal. It's only 1.8% increase in their probability of willing to sacrifice returns for SRI. Again, people who are in the 65+ age group, it's very understandable that they do not want to compromise returns to invest in SRI because investment is part of their income sources. Okay. So a summary of our findings, we find that the characteristics of the actual adopters, they tend to be 65+. They have heard of SRI and they can explain it, which means that they have decent SRI knowledge. They prefer some sort of exclusion in their investment strategy. They use qualified information sources, including their financial advisors, their KiwiSaver providers, as well as some independent qualified information sources like the government website and things like Might for Money and RIA. And they tend to perceive better performance from SRI. So that suggests that they must have some good return experience from ethical investment products. They tend to have high environmental considerations and they tend to perceive high consumer effectiveness on environmental outcomes, and they place high trust in ethical investments.
Right, so 2 more screens just summarising what we've found. So you can see now when we think about the high perceived SRI returns, they're actual or the potential adopters. They tend to be that young middle-aged age bracket. They are urban dwellers and they've got that high perceived consumer effectiveness on the social outcomes. And then the final set of results on the willingness to give up returns. And just switch over, thank you. We can see again actual potential adopters, so there's some overlap here. The younger middle-aged age bracket again, they know what social responsible investing is, they can explain it, so they've got good knowledge. They have that preference of exclusion, so they want to screen out non-ethical investments, and that real strong focus on environmental considerations and consumer effectiveness again on social outcomes. So from our results, we have 4 policy implications that have arisen from the findings. So we can see the information is really, really important in targeting that younger age group of investors to increase their awareness around what social responsible investing in has come out of these results, as well as increasing the number and the quality of independent and qualified information sources. And then environment has a big focus in terms of actual adoption, so trying to promote the environmental consciousness around the types of investments that are discriminating across social responsible investing boundaries, and then looking at financial performance. So that perception experience of positive returns is really important. So promoting that, and then finally using that exclusion strategy to screen out non-ethical investments. So thank you for your time, and we might be able to host 1 question. Thank you.
So thanks guys for that, and sorry everyone online for the technical glitches at the start there. It seems we've prioritized everyone else's presentations and forgot about our own. I just wanted to mention that although there was results there around the willingness to give up returns, I don't think we would say that doing responsible investing means you give up returns. It's just that those survey participants were willing to do so. So we've got no questions on the chat. Is there any questions from the room? In that case, we're back on time, thankfully, sort of. So we're going to have a short break and for afternoon tea, and then we'll meet back here at 3:15. Again, there will be a couple of polls popping up, and at 3:15 we will start our ESG investing session with a few interesting final speakers, and then close at 10 to 5. So we'll see you all back here in about 10 minutes. Thanks, guys.